Hello, I wanted to take a moment to have a chat with you about my new book, Coming of Age. Firstly, I'm going to talk a little bit about my first book. My first book was called From Carbon to Cane. It was about my journey, basically, giving up the tools of the modern carp angler, starting to take on a more traditional approach. I've always had a deep interest in the tools that were used back in the 1950s when carp fishing was very new, but for many years I've fished as a modern angler with carbon rods, big pit reels, spods, as you'd see carp anglers on the circle waters today. So I decided, because I had such a deep interest in the tools of the anglers of the 1950s, split cane rods, centre pin reels, Mitchell reels, famous waters such as Waldale, Beechmere, Red Pool, I decided to purchase a few bits and pieces. I got myself a couple of Richard Walker Mark IV carp rods, some Mitchell 300s, and they were lovely tools to have. A bit scared to use them straight away. Eventually I did use a split cane. It was a Chapman 550 was the first rod that I actually used. I went to a little pool that contained some koi carp. Lovely looking fish, they fight really hard. Quite easy to locate as well. So I fished down there with a centre pin reel and a Chapman 550, and I hooked a carp and I lost it. But the feeling of hooking that carp on the split cane rod was just revolutionary. It was like the rod was a part of my body. It just had so much life and soul. I couldn't go back to using carbon rods. So eventually I ended up selling all of my modern tackle and now fish exclusively with vintage tackle. So I've got sort of something. I've got something for trotting, something for float fishing, a few rods for carp fishing, stalking, something to cover all bases. Even a fly rod, which I haven't done much of at the moment, but something that I'm going to do, I plan to do soon. So the first book, From Carbon to Cane, was about a transition. It started with a trip to Redmar in August, using carbon rods, free matching rods with big pit reels and bag of boilies, and did quite well over a week session. And the book ends with another trip to Redmar the following July, and I had completely turned around the tackle that I was using. It was the mindset, the tackle, everything about me was more geared towards a traditional angler, with split cane rods, Mitchell reels, the sort of stuff that would have been used back in the 50s when the likes of Richard Walker and Pete Thomas was fishing there. And I caught just as many fish. So it wasn't about the tackle that I was using that made me catch those fish, especially on smaller waters. Like the water that you see behind me now, this is Hilsey Moat. It's not actually a fishery anymore, but it was where I started. I used to sea fish from the age of 12, and when I took up coarse fishing, this was where I did it because it was local. I used to live just across the road, and there's two sections to the moat. This is the section that held the carp mostly, and there's another section just behind the camera, which was predominantly a tench water. So the first book was about a transition. This book is more about how things are now. The dust has settled. I'm a father now. I've actually got 2 children now, whereas when I was writing the first book I only had 1. And this book basically starts off with some poignant trips since the last book. Ashmead, I spent a week at Ashmead, which was fantastic. There's a week winter fishing in February in here, which is quite eventful. There's Fort Rowner Moat, which I'm fishing at the moment, which is a fabulous water, one of my favourites, and rivers and all sorts. Basically, it's quite a big book. It's got 2.5 times the content that the first book had. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the introduction to you, just to give you a bit of a feel for the book. So here we are. The next instalment is finally complete. It's been somewhat tricky to keep enough unpublished material back for you guys. Posting on the ever popular blog and the various angling forums I frequent has meant that every time I go fishing and then write up the events that took place, I feel the need to put it straight out there and show people. Thankfully I managed to keep aside these stories you're about to delve into. Another eclectic bunch of diary pieces covering a great many venues and memorable fishing adventures. Last time it was all about transition, my journey to a new and more innocent form of angling, whilst taking on a completely different mindset. Now, a few years on, and it's more about settlement, enjoyment, and a look at how things are now the dust has settled. There have been some epic angling adventures, for not only has this new way brought me a new take on things, it's also taken me to places I never dreamt I'd visit. It has taken me to the wonderful Ashmead in the heart of the Somerset Levels in search of Leviathan, and to the mountains of Bilf Wells in Wales in pursuit of the oldest strain of carp known. There have been adventures to more familiar venues too, such as my beloved Redmire Pool and Wagoners Wells. The tiny River Wallington, I think, has deviated from its original course and now runs through my veins, with the mighty gudgeon that swim there amongst my most favourite of fishes. And the private and very secluded and utterly beautiful Fort Round and Moat has been the scene of many a successful day out and has been my main source of solitude. Since my last offering, I would like to think I've become quite accomplished in the ways of the traditional fettler, with rod repairs, restorations and float making taking place in my tiny man shed, with the results gradually becoming more and more pleasing to the eye. This usually tends to happen throughout the colder months, when I can shut myself away, switch on a light, and no matter what the element I throw at the more hardened angler who might dare to venture out, I can make or tinker with items of tackle from the relative comfort of my cosy den. As with all things, clutter usually stops play, but there are times when a good spring clean allows me to view the workbench, and the fettling can once again resume. Not only do I now consider myself to be a fully fledged traditional angler, I'm now a fully fledged father, whom at the time of writing this is expecting the second instalment of children around the start of the new season. So I guess a lot of this volume will revolve around cramming in as much angling as humanly possibly whilst I still can, especially throughout the diary section. Having a young family and holding down a full-time job will no doubt have a huge effect on my angling hours, but I do think that fishing the way I do lends itself well with the life of he who has little time. That said, last summer Jessica, now 3 years of age, enjoyed a handful of mornings fishing for rudd on a local venue, even managed a magnificent crucian of 1.5 pounds from Marsh Farm in Surrey. With her little creel, split cane rod, she looked quite the part, but our angling together would only be for half an hour or so at a time, and there would always be a visit to the strawberry picking field straight after. The general theme of all this has been enjoyment without pressure. That's the key to success. I shall begin this volume with some of my more momentous trips since I last put pen to paper, and then attempt to take a slice out of my diary from winter through to spring and into summer, just in time for the birth of my baby boy, which will no doubt spell the end of fishing for the foreseeable. Hopefully this will give the reader an insight into how things have changed now I've settled into this new way of thinking. Call it bedside reading if you will. Something perhaps you can dip into and dip out of whenever another tale takes your fancy. Numbers mean very little to me and my angling these days, and you will see from the chapters within this book that I have purposely tried to avoid numbers as much as possible. Becoming infatuated by numbers certainly detracts from the pure enjoyment that I have learned. You will see that some things are difficult to shrug off. I always tend to go into things full of confidence, which in turn promotes a certain pressure to catch. But if things get difficult, I've become more akin to shake off the pressure, open my eyes and enjoy the day and what is around me instead of beat myself over why it isn't happening. Living for the now as opposed to what might be. The business of becoming a changed man was never going to happen overnight, but the signs are good. I feel as though I've taken giant strides towards a better place I set out to discover. As previously mentioned, a lot of the words I tend to write are published via forums, blogs and other such media-based platforms, but luckily I've kept a few special trips back in the hope that time might present me with a decent chunk and that I might put together another series of scribblings I can call a book. I do hope you enjoy reading these chapters as much as I've enjoyed living and documenting them and then putting them together. It was a marvellous feeling to produce the last book and to see it do rather well. But to dream of creating a second offering at the time felt a million miles away, so to see this come to fruition is an achievement that pleases me enormously. Some of these jottings may be fish-filled, some may contain none at all, but they will all take the reader along for the ride and maybe open their eyes to a different angle, a new way of approaching their own angling. So much of the true essence of my angling during the previous years was missed through being blindfolded, not seeing the special but being hell-bent on success. Don't get me wrong, I'll still set out to catch fish, otherwise it would be little more than a pleasant stroll or a relaxing sit by the waterside, but landing a monster isn't the result by which everything is hinged upon. There we go, now I have my excuses in early, we can begin. So hopefully that little introduction just gives you an idea of what the book's about, what's going to be happening. The illustrations that Adam did for me are fantastic. The book's been put together beautifully by Wayne and Pauline at Little Egret Press. So there you go. Take care, and if you get the book, hope you enjoy it.